Silence has a sound, and in the life of the Church it is never empty or neutral. It often carries more weight than speeches, documents, or carefully crafted statements. That silence became especially noticeable after the Consistory convened under Pope Leo XIV. Many faithful Catholics had hoped this gathering would finally address long-standing questions, especially those surrounding the liturgy, the heart of Catholic worship. For years, debates had circled endlessly. Familiar words like mission, dialogue, inclusion, and synodality were repeated so often they began to feel ritualistic. Yet beneath all of them was a shared sense of waiting, an unspoken awareness that something essential remained untouched. When the consistory ended, that feeling only deepened. There was no decisive word, no clear doctrinal clarification, no unmistakable turn back toward the altar. Once again, the language of the Church emphasized processes over presence, structures over sacrifice, listening over proclamation. It was this silence, more than any official declaration, that created the space in which Bishop Athanasius Schneider's voice emerged with such force. His interview with LifeSite News on the John Henry Weston show did not feel staged or opportunistic. It felt inevitable, as if something restrained for a long time had finally broken through. Schneider did not speak like a strategist calculating his words, nor like a courtier guarding his position. He spoke with the directness of someone convinced that truth matters more than comfort, and that clarity is an act of charity in times of confusion. If you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this, because what you're about to hear is not just news, it's a wake-up call for every heart that still believes truth should burn brighter than silence. Now grab your rosary, quiet your spirit, and let your heart listen, not just with ears, but with faith. From the beginning, it was clear that this was not mere commentary. It was correction. When the Second Vatican Council was described, almost automatically, as the Church's guiding star, Schneider did not accept the phrase politely. He interrupted the entire direction of the conversation with a simple but striking statement: the guiding star of the Church is not a council, but Jesus Christ. This was not a minor clarification or a play on words. It was a declaration about where the Church's center of gravity must remain. Christ, Schneider insisted, is not one reference point among many. He is not one light competing with others. He is the center around which everything else either aligns or drifts into meaninglessness. When the Church begins to orbit its own documents, assemblies, or internal processes, it risks forgetting the source of its light altogether. At that moment, the interview crossed a threshold. It ceased to be an internal Church discussion and became a diagnosis of spiritual orientation. Schneider described a Church that has gradually lowered its gaze. Once oriented upward toward heaven, eternity, and the altar, it now increasingly looks inward. It debates itself, analyzes itself, reforms itself, listens to itself, and consults itself. It speaks constantly, yet adores less. For Schneider, this is not a harmless development or a neutral evolution. It is a danger, because the heart of the Church is not a process, a structure, or a method of governance. The heart of the Church is Christ, truly present and adored. Remove that center, and everything else becomes noise. His treatment of the Second Vatican Council was one of the most careful and pointed parts of the interview. Schneider did not reject the Council, nor did he dismiss its authority. But he firmly rejected its transformation into an ideology. He stated openly what many are reluctant to say, that ambiguous formulations exist within the conciliar texts. To deny this, he argued, is not an act of faith but of intellectual dishonesty. The Council defined itself as pastoral. It did not proclaim new dogmas, nor did it intend to settle definitively certain doctrinal questions. Yet over time, it has been elevated to an absolute standard, isolated from the continuity of previous councils, and used to justify changes that bear little resemblance to the Church's received tradition. To illustrate this distortion, Schneider used a powerful image. "The Church," he said, "is not the sun but the moon. She does not generate light, she reflects it. When the Church forgets this and begins to act as if she herself were the source of truth and meaning, she enters a dangerous pattern of self-exaltation." This mindset, he argued, would have been foreign and unacceptable to the Church Fathers, who understood humility and reception, not self-creation, as the Church's posture before God. This ancient perspective shaped Schneider's approach to synodality. He did not analyze it primarily as a structure or administrative model, but as a spiritual orientation. His judgment was clear and uncompromising. As it is currently practiced, synodality represents a turning inward, creating a permanent ecclesial parliament of roundtables, consultations, assemblies, and endless discussion. Such a model risks transforming the Church from a mystical body oriented toward God into a forum centered on itself. According to Schneider, this approach does not arise organically from Catholic tradition. Instead, it closely resembles Protestant ecclesiology, and like Protestantism, it produces predictable results: doctrinal fragmentation, relativism, and an increasing adaptation to the spirit of the world. The criticism grew sharper when the conversation turned to evangelization. How, Schneider asked, can Christ be proclaimed clearly if the Church herself no longer speaks with one voice? How can the gospel be heard by the world when bishops and cardinals openly teach opposing views on fundamental moral and doctrinal issues? For him, this internal confusion is the real scandal of the age. It is not external persecution, but confusion within. A silence disguised as dialogue. A plurality that masks the absence of clear truth. From there, the discussion moved almost inevitably to the liturgy, not as a matter of taste or discipline, but as an ontological reality. For Schneider, the liturgy is not simply one ministry among others. It is the Church's primary task, because humanity is created first and foremost to worship God. When the Mass loses its clear orientation toward God and becomes centered on the assembly, dialogue, and self-expression, something essential breaks. It was here that Schneider delivered one of the most striking judgments of the interview, describing synodality, understood in this way, as a poor economy of ecclesial life with a low spiritual cost. These words were not aimed at a single policy or program, but at a direction he believes is leading the Church away from the altar. From that point, the interview moved into what many found most explosive. Schneider spoke directly about the Novus Ordo Massachusetts. His judgment was delivered without hesitation: as it currently stands, it cannot continue. This was not, he emphasized, because of pressure from traditionalists or personal preference, but because it corresponds neither to what the Second Vatican Council truly envisioned nor to the liturgical tradition that preceded it. To support this claim, he recalled the Mass of 1965, celebrated by the Council Fathers themselves. This liturgy, deeply rooted in the traditional Roman rite yet modestly open to the vernacular, represented what he described as an organic and seamless reform. Reverent in posture and unmistakably oriented toward God, it embodied the Council's authentic intentions. What followed in later years, he argued, was something entirely different. The traditional Latin Mass, Schneider insisted, should not be viewed as a symbol of resistance or nostalgia. It is a millennial inheritance that predates the Council of Trent and belongs to the living memory of the Church. To treat it as a tolerated exception or a problem to be suppressed is not pastoral care, but injustice. His proposal was both radical and restrained: do not change the traditional Mass, but gradually reform the Novus Ordo. Patiently and faithfully, it should be brought back into continuity with the received form of the Roman Rite, preserving only minor differences such as the wider use of the vernacular. This, Schneider argued, is the only path to genuine liturgical peace, not compromise or uneasy coexistence, but restoration. As he moved into concrete details, his language became more prophetic. Ad orientem worship, he said, is not an optional aesthetic choice but an essential reform. It breaks the anthropocentric circle of modern liturgy and reminds both priest and people that the Mass is not a conversation but an offering directed toward God. Direction matters, because truth has direction. Similarly, communion on the knees and on the tongue was not framed as nostalgia, but as a matter of spiritual survival. Schneider described current widespread practices as an open wound in the Church, contributing to profanation and a gradual loss of reverence and belief in the real presence. These were not polite observations but urgent warnings. One of the most controversial moments came when he addressed the presence of women in the presbytery. Speaking without diplomatic softening, he described a logical progression that leads from expanded liturgical roles to confusion about the nature of the priesthood itself. He did not attack women or deny their dignity. Instead, he made a statement that unsettled many. A truly Catholic woman, he said, should not desire the altar. The model he proposed was the Virgin Mary, not as a visible protagonist, but as the hidden heart of the Church, closest to Christ precisely because she did not seek his place. Schneider also criticized modern liturgical music, describing it as worldly and Protestant in spirit, unsuitable for Catholic worship. He called for a return to sacred music that expresses transcendence rather than entertainment. Latin, he insisted, must not be treated as a relic. It remains the Church's universal language and should be preserved at least in symbolic places and religious life, so the Church remembers she is not bound to one culture, one era, or one ideology. In the final moments of the interview, Schneider addressed the Pope directly, not with defiance or flattery, but with filial clarity. He openly professed the faith of the Church and named what he sees as the errors of the present moment. He called for a true liturgical peace, founded not on concessions or political compromise, but on justice, justice for the traditional liturgy, justice for the faith of generations, and justice for Christ, who is owed worship worthy of his majesty. It was not a comforting interview. It did not reassure or promise easy solutions. Yet that is precisely why it resonated so deeply. In a time when the Church often seems to speak in circles, endlessly consulting and rephrasing, Athanasius Schneider spoke in a straight line, pointing upward, reminding listeners where the Church's true center must always remain. If this message touched your heart, like this video and share your thoughts in the comment Amen and stay with us. More Eucharistic stories, deeper reflections, and holy insights are on the way. May Christ in the Eucharist be your light, your rest, your truth. Amen.